On July 15th, 1994, White Sox manager Gene Lamont is tipped off that Albert Belle has a corked bat. Rule 6.03A4 states that if a manager suspects an opposing player of using or attempting to use a corked or improperly treated or altered bat, the manager may request the umpire crew chief to inspect and impound the bat. If the umpire's visual inspection reveals no irregularities, the bat will be further examined either in the city where the game is played or at the commissioner's office. Each manager is limited to making this request one time per game. So Lamont saunters over to umpire Dave Phillips and requests that they check out Albert Belle's bat. The ump doesn't note anything odd about the bat upon initial inspection, but that's not the end of the road. Per the rule, it needs to be further examined to ensure everything is kosher, so the bat is confiscated and taken to the umpire's dressing room. Around the 6th inning of the game, upon entering this room, it's discovered that a bat is still there, but it's not the bat. Despite the door being locked, the shiny new bat of Albert Belle had been replaced by a well-worn bat. The difference was anything but subtle. In addition to the bat's apparent instantaneous aging, Belle had his name inscribed on all of his bats. The name on this bat was no longer his. It was Paul Sorrento's. Today on the Dugs, we're taking a deep dive into the great bat heist of 1994. Welcome back to the Dugs. I'm Johnny Paprika. It's our off season, so we're doing one-off videos, but our core content is generally simulations of baseball tournaments between interesting teams comprised of players from throughout baseball history that we then bring the highlights to you in an off-kilter and potentially half-drunk version of Sportscenter. Though we use out-of-the-park baseball to run these simulations, we look at ourselves as less of a gaming channel and more of a platform for telling a lot of baseball stories and a lot of baseball jokes. So if that sounds interesting to you, help the channel grow by throwing a like on this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Back to our story. Something you have to know to fully appreciate this story is that Albert Belle might be certifiably insane. As crazy as this story is, it's just a blip in his history. Buster Olney does a nice job summing up several of the man's exploits, so I'm just going to turn to his quote to kick this off. It was taken as fact in baseball circles that Albert Belle was nuts. He slurped coffee constantly and seemed to be in perpetual caffeinated frenzy. Few escaped his wrath. On some days he would destroy the post-game buffet, launching plates into the shower, and after one poor at-bat against Boston, he retreated to the visitors' clubhouse and took a bat to teammate Kenny Lofton's boombox. Belle preferred to have the clubhouse cold, below 60 degrees, and when one chilly teammate turned up the heat, Belle walked over, turned down the thermostat, and then smashed it with his bat. His nickname thereafter was Mr. Freeze. Outside of these incidents, he once refused to take a base after getting plunked with a pitch, eventually telling the catcher to convey to his pitcher, and I quote, "Throw the motherfucking ball over the fucking plate, aight?" In 1995, he was turning away trick-or-treaters during Halloween, which rubbed one particular group of teenagers the wrong way. So what do teens do on Halloween when they're upset with something? Well, the answer is nothing, not a goddamn thing when the house in question is Albert Belle's, but they went the more traditional route of egging Albert's house. Albert, being an adult about it, did the only reasonable thing he could think of and started to chase them down in his car. He was fined $100 for reckless driving and was later sued for the slightly larger amount of $850,000 by one of the teen's guardians for reportedly bumping one of the kids with his car. Not sure if he did or not, but the lawsuit was eventually settled 2 years later. In 1996, he straight up leveled Fernando Vina. My favorite part about this is the hard-hitting journalism afterwards.
Now, the umpire could say that Belle disrupts the double play here.
Well, this isn't a
Yep, maybe. In 2006, he was sentenced 90 days in prison for stalking his ex-girlfriend. In 2018, he was arrested for a DUI and indecent exposure. So we're not dealing with a straight shooter here, but crazy as he is, he's got a rock-solid alibi for the bat theft. He was right there on camera the entire night, going 1 for 4, striking out twice, and playing left field. He's crazy, not a wizard. So it was a mystery, but not a mystery without its clues. We're talking baseball players here. Baseball players who had to pull off a heist in short order. MI6, they are not. In the 6th inning, custodians noticed that there were clumps of ceiling tile on the floor and twisted metal brackets in the ceiling along with the displaced ceiling tile. It It was readily apparent that somebody had dropped into the room from the ceiling. That someone turned out to be Cleveland relief pitcher Jason Grimsley. Grimsley wasn't opposed to getting his hands dirty in his own right. He was smack dab in the middle of the steroid scandal in 2006. His drug use reportedly started in 1998 when he was attempting to make it back to the big leagues after a demotion brought about by a shoulder injury. He had begun HGH and other drugs to try and aid his recovery, which is morally questionable, but you can't argue with the results. After starting PEDs, the amount of money he was making increased ninefold when compared to the cash he was making prior, as he shaved a full run off of his ERA. His steroid use was eventually found out, and he requested that the Orioles release him from his contract in 2006. As part of the steroid investigations, he was one of the main whistleblowers for the reported steroid use of Andy Pettitte, Roger Clemens, Miguel Tejada, Jay Gibbons, and Brian Roberts. In 1999, he was blowing the whistle on himself. Seriously, this guy would just make the worst mobster of all time. 5 years after the unsolved bat heist incident, Jason Grimsley finally admitted to being the bat thief, which makes the debris that was left behind at the crime scene easier to explain. He only weighed 180 pounds, but he carried that weight on a 6-foot 3-inch frame, so I imagine he descended from the ceiling tiles with all the grace of a 3-year-old doing parkour. He described the heist as one of the biggest adrenaline rushes he'd ever experienced, and that he had gone skydiving once and he could compare it to that. He reportedly crawled on his belly through the ceiling, flashlight in his mouth, and then dropped down on a refrigerator before swiping the bat from Philip's locker. But why go through all this trouble and then swap it out with a bat that obviously wasn't Albert's? Well, that's because every single one of Albert's bats were corked. A fact that was later confirmed by teammate Omar Vizquel in his biography, which is apparently a thing that exists. I imagine it's 800 pages on the importance of playing solid fundamental defense, which I hear that they can also give to patients prior to surgery when the anesthesiologist is on vacation. Jason Grimsley came clean while he was still an active player before one of his games. Fortunately for him, the league chose not to pursue any sort of disciplinary action. 5 years prior, in the meat of the bat heist drama, the American League was not so passé. White Sox chairman Jerry Reinsdorf was on record claiming that this was a very serious crime, and current baseball commissioner Bud Selig agreed. So, naturally, the next move was to fly in a former FBI agent from New York in Kevin Hallinan. Now, I have to remind you, there was a displaced ceiling tile, pieces of the ceiling tile left on the floor, bent metal support strips whose purpose was to hold the ceiling tiles in place, and a replacement bat that looked nothing like the original bat, down to having an entirely different name on it. But I guess you have to be thorough. And he was thorough, going as far as dusting for fingerprints. They didn't figure out who the culprit was, but they did determine how the thief broke in. It was through the ceiling. You know, where the displaced ceiling tile and bent metal supports were. Blew that puppy wide open. This wasn't the only time the FBI was invoked in this case. The American League threatened to get active members of the FBI involved in the case if Belle didn't cooperate and own up to what happened. Now, I initially thought this was overkill, so I headed over to the FBI website to ensure that I had a firm understanding of the FBI's purpose. Their mission is to protect the U.S. from terrorist attacks, protect the U.S. against foreign intelligence, espionage, and cyber operations, combat significant cyber criminal activity, and combat public corruption at all levels. A bat swap naturally checks all these boxes, so I'll be the first to admit that I was wrong. Still, the threat worked, and Albert eventually produced the original bat, which was first x-rayed and then savagely sawed open in front of him, which bears repeating. First, they x-rayed it, and then they sawed it open. I guess if you're going to start with overkill, you might as well end with it. Naturally, they discovered that the bat was corked, and Albert Belle received a 10-game suspension. He appealed, and it was dropped to 7 games. It was all a bit of a moot point anyhow, as the players went on strike that year, canceling the remainder of the games, including the postseason and World Series. So there you have it. I hope some of you haven't heard this story as I hadn't and enjoyed the roller coaster. We'll be back on the 22nd with a new video, and appended to the end of that video will be the announcement of the winners of the Out of the Park Baseball 23 giveaway. As long as it's not April 22nd, 2022 currently, there's still time to enter, so check out our contest announcement video to find out how you can take part. The finger is currently showing you the way, and we'll also post the link to the video in the description. We hope to see you back on the 22nd. Once again, I'll ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this, as that will help the Dugs grow. Until next time, I've been Johnny Paprika, hoping all your balls are fair and all your wood is good. Good night, everybody.